Thanks for coming back. This is the fourth in the edition of Traveling with Bill. Today we're taking outside of Rome, and we're going to get away from Rome. We're going to go down to Ostia, Pisa, Milan, and Stresa, Italy, heading up to the north, up to the Alps. So let's get with the program today and move on. We got a lot of stuff here to talk about. Lido di Ostia and Ostia Antica. Ostia Antica started out as a harbor, and like any world, the harbors were a very important lifeline to the cities. Rome itself is a distance away from Ostia, but in fact Ostia served as the harbor for Rome. As you'll see as the program goes on, there's a lot of interesting things to see there, so if you're ever traveling, if the country ever opens up again, you'll have the opportunity to have some background. The program objectives today are to be introduce you to these four areas: middle of Italy all the way to the north of Italy near the Alps. Let's start at Lido di Ostia, and that's a small town once again that is turned into a fishing village in the mid 1800s. The current population is about 86,000 people, and most of those people work at the Leonardo da Vinci Airport, which services Rome. For you folks who, in fact, get lost in Italy and tired of pizzas and pasta, the Wild West restaurant is, in fact, located right there, and it serves all of your hometown treats, including hoagies and hamburgers and anything you might want. Now we go to Ostia Antica. Ostia Antica is an extraordinary Roman site. It actually served, as I said, as the gateway, and we'll see what happens here whenever you see that little map on the right-hand side, how close that Ostia Antica was to the coastline. But in fact, that's not the case today. It's miles from the coastline because of the settlement that came from the Tiber River. It was settled about 4 BC and served as I said, Rome's principal port, not airport, but port for hundreds of years. It witnessed the rise of the superpower, its dominance, and eventual decline. Okay, one of the big things there that this was the site of the death of Saint Monica. I have to bring that name up, mother of Saint Augustine, who on the way back from Africa after Augustine's conversion to Christianity. Ostia Antica's place in history is most notable for an attack by pirates in 68 BC, which led to an unprecedented power being handed to Pompey the Great, setting yet another precedent which damaged the foundations of the Republic in the future. Today we'll see the ruins that are left, including the Roman theater, the Baths of Neptune, and the remainders of the military camp and temples to the ancient deities. Ostia Antica, once again, as you'll see by the little map there, how far it has moved because of settlement in from the coastline. So Ostia Antica, if you look at the map, directly south of that is the Lido di Ostia now. Ostia Antica is so many more things than the elements that we just talked about as far as the baths and things. This combines to give a great picture, because unlike, and we'll compare it here in a minute, unlike Italica outside of Seville, this was basically intact as in fact the years went on, and you'll see why here in a minute. Ostia is about 1 hour's drive outside of Rome, okay, and you can get there by train. It only costs about €1.50, and you can also take the subway to let you off right at the entrance of Ostia. We were told by our guide that the town was buried at the direction of one of the emperors. And whenever it was buried, when we're talking about buried, we're talking about under mud for hundreds and hundreds of years, because of the fact they didn't want it found. I don't know why. It just, like I said, it was an entire city that they coated with mud, but that protected it, and you'll see how well it protected it. As in Spain, anywhere you dig in Italy usually has a ruin of some sort. This financially causes those builders problems because of the fact that they The cost of reclaiming these antiquities that are under your building site can drive you right out of business because of the fact that it's so expensive and the time delays that happen. The city of Ostia was for business only. It didn't have the trappings of Rome. It didn't have the great colosseums or the large buildings running government. It didn't have any of these. These were for businessmen, workers, shipwrights, and other trades, cargo handlers and things like that, and their families. Okay, so I mean, they didn't have the ultra poor, they didn't have the ultra rich, they didn't have the major castles and things, temples that you see, but they did live comfortably, and you'll see here in a second how comfortably they did live. When we talk about baths in any of the Italian cities, this is one of the things that you have to look at. This is not only a social area, but this is where the local political picture is done. One of the biggest excavations in Ostia, as you pass through the main gate, are the Baths of Neptune. And this is built in 117 to 161 BC, or CE, which is a pre-Julian Roman calendar. Unlike the baths in Rome, these are basically simple. They don't hold the 8,000 people a day. They hold maybe 400 or 500 people a day, and these are the people who are taking a break from working and things. As you see there by the tiled floor, this is something that is in fact a way to get people to relax, get them to understand who built the baths for their benefit, but these tiled floors are thousands of years old, and they're still in excellent condition. Once again, I mentioned earlier that this city was put under mud, and so what you see here is a lot of structure, no roofs, because apparently they fell in over the time. But in fact, the structures exist, and you'll have a pretty good idea, and we'll take a comparison look here between Italica and Ostia here in a minute. The theater of Ostia hold about 4,000 people in its heyday. All right, it was built by Agrippa, and this name keeps coming up. If you remember when we were in Rome, the Pantheon was built by Agrippa. Okay, and he is famous for many things, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Most of the seating that still remains today, as you see there on the left-hand side, the back wall that held the roof is gone, but the marble flooring and everything still very much is there. You'll see this is a place where they had plays and actions and concerts and everything else even back then. But the scenes that you see on the right-hand side there were ahead of what were at one time the fast food places for the people that were attending the gatherings at the theater. Excuse me. The tiled floors of Ostia. In front of the businesses, in front of the stores and things, were these tiled floors. And some of these were, they're magnificent, but they also tell a story. It's not just a case where they just put a design out there. For example, the lower right-hand side, you'll see that that has to deal with a ship, and so that was either a organization that dealt with shipping, or a shipwright with people who built the ships, or a company who managed the ships, or whatever. The picture in the center with the elephant is one that, in fact, dealt with business in Africa. Okay, so when you look at these things, you can see hints of what they did and what made them what they are today. I told you we were going to compare Ostia and Italica. You see on the left, Ostia, 4th century BC, still basically intact. This is the shopping area on the left that we'll see again in a little bit. Italica on the right at 206 BC. I mentioned in the last program that in fact a lot of the materials were here. When the Moors moved into Spain, they took the materials and helped build what is now Seville, Spain, which is about 6 kilometers away from Italica. But they took a lot of the building material and in fact went and got this down to its current state, which the country actually just started to protect about 20 years ago. The warehouse district. I mentioned that this area was in fact used for business. It was used for bringing materials into Rome and sending materials out of Rome. Okay, and the warehouses that you see here are basically grain warehouses. So whenever they unburied these buildings, this is what you came up with. And you can see they're not plain at all. They're very, relatively fancy. And they had the opportunity to, in fact, hold grain that could be carried by wagons into Rome, and can be, in fact, carried other things from Rome to the rest of the world at that time. The shopping areas of Ostia still have, they have businesses going on, making things like hats and rugs and carpets and things like this, as you would have seen it back then. You see the picture on the left. All of these things are the way it was 2,000 years ago. The signs on the buildings, the gates that you see, the buildings per se, even the cobblestones that you see them standing near here on the left-hand picture, are very much what was laid, and they have held up very, very well. The picture you see on the right, once again, is a different view of the shopping area. This is amazing because, like after Nero started putting building codes into Rome after the Rome burnt, Ostia had building codes, and they had areas for housing. They had areas for shops and warehouses and theater and things like that. Once again, there were no poor, so it doesn't have slum areas, and there were no super rich, as I mentioned. Unlike most of the places, Christianity had not yet really struck this part of Italy, but they did have a lot of different religions, and I wanted to point some of them out here because a lot of them aren't from Europe. Okay, as you see there, you have the Olympian Hercules cult that in fact came from Greece. The Juno, the chief goddess and female counter of Jupiter. Magna Mater, which is probably the oldest religion of all, about 6,000 years old at this point. Attis is the Greek god. Isis is the Egyptian religion. And what I found was really interesting is Judaism was practiced very heavily here, and in fact has one of the oldest synagogue sites in Europe at this location. So whenever we talk about religion being one thing or another, in this area, because they traded with all over the world, they brought all of their religions into this area, and they were all here. And it wasn't like they were pushed out of the city, or it wasn't like they were pushed out of the country. So it made it very interesting. Living in Ostia, once again, it was zoned. There was a port dock area. Okay, there was a warehouse area which grains and things were stored. The entertainment, the amphitheater, things like that. They had eateries called Pompiena, and they sold wine and snacks on the run, which were basically pizza style type things. They had drinks, like I said, wine and things that you could pick up there, because if you didn't have time to run home and get something to eat. The stores and the area of trade we saw, dry goods and food for the local community. The housing was interesting. Okay, the single family homes, very few of these were laid out because of the city itself were, once again, more apartment type layouts. But the condos and the garden house of the upper middle class that owned the businesses, the companies, that were doing business there, was about 2,400 square feet. And 2,400 square feet, if we look at it in comparison to the areas around here, is about the original size of the homes up in Giant Oaks. The older homes that are up there are about 2,400 square feet. And these were apartments. So they were pretty well, pretty well sized, and they had a lot of opportunity to, in fact, move around and do things with their families and stuff. As mentioned earlier, they weren't very rich and poor like the Roman areas. Most everybody here worked. The public toilets at Ostia, the unisex, centuries ahead of their time. While I mentioned one of the cities were 100% working class, there was a unique occupation that was handled here. And you'll see it there in the bottom. It's spelled urinators, but it was pronounced orinators. And these were the folks that, in fact, if something fell off the dock or fell off the boat and went into the Tiber River, they, in fact, went in and, in fact, picked it up and brought it back to the surface. And that was, they earned a living doing that. But I thought that when you originally look at that name, it's like, oh, okay, great. The street houses and signs on these buildings. Like I said, these were all original. These were the things that were there for 2,000 years, and after they cleaned them off and got them, they just left them all hanging on the buildings. You see the one up in the top, it's the temple for the naval people, the Casa de Diana there on the right, the Basilica, the Christian Basilica. All of these things were as they were 2,000 years ago. So when you're walking through here, you really do get a sense of life as it was. And if you look at this, just like when we looked at Rome, it wasn't too bad. You know, at least, you know, if you were a working person here, you had a good living, you had income, and you had the opportunity to live comfortably in this town. Now, I always complained to Monica about the traffic calming in the township whenever they built a new plan. And when we saw this, we figured I had to take a picture of it to show what it should look like. This would calm any traffic that we could possibly have with this big tree sitting in the middle of the road. We move on from Ostia up the coast to Livorno and Pisa. Livorno, our cruise ship went to Livorno, and it's docked there. It's located as sort of the entryway to the Tuscany area of Italy. And it's also an important ferry terminal and things like that. It's the Livorno train station is how you basically get to the areas of Tuscany, including Florence and Pisa, Lucca and Siena. In Livorno itself, it's an Italian town. It's a beautiful scenic town, but one of the, a couple of the things that you have to see when you enter into the town are the monuments. Unlike this country who keeps destroying the history that we have, the main city square in Livorno is the Piazza della Repubblica and can be found outside of the train station. So when you get there on the train, you walk out and you see this Leopold II, the Grand Duke of Tuscany. He was recognized as a liberal monarch, authorizing the Tuscan Constitution in 1848 and allowing a degree of free press. The Grand Duke was deposed briefly, only to be restored the same year with the assistance of the Austrian troops who occupied the state for about 6 or 7 years. Leopold attempted a policy of neutrality with regard to the Second Italian War of Independence, but was expelled by a bloodless coup in 1859, just before the beginning of the war. On the other side of the plaza is Ferdinand III, the Grand Duke of Tuscany. When his father was elected the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, Ferdinand succeeded him as the Grand Duke of Tuscany, officially taking the office in 1790. In 1790, during the French Revolution, Ferdinand became the first monarch to recognize the French Republic. He attempted to work peacefully with it. However, the rulers of Britain and Russia persuaded him to join their side of war of the First Coalition. Ferdinand provided his allies with passive support, and he was forced to renounce his throne by a treaty of, and I can't say it here, Arguza, when Napoleon brushed him aside to make way for the Kingdom of Eustria, created as compensation by the Bourbon Dukes of Parma. Okay, so and once again, like the Moors in Spain, most of these, unlike what they had there, most of these rulers were deposed in more of a peaceful manner. Like I said, when we look at the Moors in Spain, you'll see that most of them were assassinated by their sons or relatives. and they were assassinated in the future by their sons or relatives. So it was a continuation of a terrible process. But unlike here, they were deposed and then many times brought back, or deposed and just went to retire. They didn't necessarily die. The next monument that you see in Livorno is the monument in the port of Livorno. Is a piece of art called the Monument of the Four Moors. And this powerful monument depicted Moors as slaves, and they were added in 1626. The Moors symbolized the four corners of the world and were also meant to represent the victories of Fernando I over the Ottomans. Moving on to Pisa, okay? There's a short trolley ride, and the trolley ride isn't like what we would imagine. It's more like the rides at Kennywood that has an engine in the front and a couple of cars in the back. It takes you right to Miracle Square, and this is probably one of the most fascinating places I've ever seen, because in such a short area it has such important relics of the past, and it's something that have lived through a couple world wars in that area. During World War II, much of Pisa was destroyed by German or Allied bombing. However, the cathedral, Baptistery, the famous Leaning Tower, escaped unharmed. Okay, for individuals looking to take the tower tour, it just opened here, a number of years ago, but you have to make reservations in advance. So if you're thinking about traveling, you can make reservations 20 days in advance for you and your party. But like I said, don't miss it, because if you miss that day, you don't get to slip to the next date kind of thing. This is a sign we saw, sorry the tower is not leaning today, and so somebody had a sense of humor. Formerly known as the Plaza del Duomo, the Cathedral Square, the square is dominated by four major religious edifices: the Pisa Cathedral, the Baptistery, the Campanile, and the Monumental Cemetery. There's also a new hospital and a opera located at this location, but they're sort of a minor thing. They were correct when you're looking at it from this standpoint. It's really not leaning that much, but there are some important things and some important activities and dates that we have to look at. It took almost 200 years to complete the tower. Okay, between 1589 and 1592, Galileo, who lived in Pisa at the time, made his famous dropping of the cannonballs to prove his theory of relativity. Those objects fell at the same rate regardless of their size. During World War II, the Allies suspected the Germans were using the tower as an observation point. An army sergeant was sent to confirm the presence of the German troops in the tower. He was so impressed by the beauty, he refrained from ordering an artillery strike, sparing it from destruction. Bringing the tower into focus. When you look at this, we always hear about how much it leans. Yes, it does. But over the years, numerous attempts were made to, in fact, correct it, because it was starting to fall. In, let me see here, it was, 1989, the Civic Tower of Pavia did collapse. So they were really concerned that, in fact, this was going to, in fact, do the same thing. And in 1990, I believe, they had the stabilization of this. They reduced the tilt by 17.7 inches, returning it to its 1838 position. After a decade of repair effort, the tower was reopened to the public on 2001 and was declared stable for another 300 years. Now, I'm not sure about that. One of the things that we found out in Pisa was the only thing that doesn't lean in Pisa is the Pisarian walls. The Roman walls that were protecting Pisa and the other local communities are the only things that don't lean. Every other building in Pisa leans, okay, which was really sort of eye-opening. The wall's construction started in 1155 and it ended in 1161 when the final section of the wall was in fact built. Pisa's power grew because of this wall and the protection that it offered the residents of the community itself. When we look at the whole area here, we have to look at the Baptistery. It was dedicated to St. John the Baptist, which seems to be okay. I mean, as far as the name and everything is concerned. It was a Romanesque building. It was begun in 1153, and it was built in the Romanesque style. The construction was not finished until the 14th century, when the top story or the dome was added. It is the largest baptistery in Italy, with a circumference of almost 107.25 meters, and it is a few centimeters taller than the Leaning Tower itself. Inside the baptistery are different structures, which makes it very interesting. Okay, the structure added. The first level is depicting St. John the Baptist. The upper level showing Christ between the Madonna and St. John the Baptist, flanked by angels and evangelists. The interior is immense, very similar to that of the Pantheon or at least in feeling, the Pantheon in Rome. The octagonal baptismal font at the center dates from 1246, when it was made by Galileo di Como. The scenes on the pulpit, especially the classical form of the naked Hercules, which seems totally out of place, show best at the Pizzino's abilities as the most important precursor to the Italian Renaissance structure in Italy at the time. The monumental cemetery, which is under building, which is interesting. The walled cemetery is said to have been built around the shipload of sacred soil from Calvary brought back from Pisa by the Fourth Crusade and the Archbishop of Pisa in the 12th century. This is where the name of the Holy Field originates. The building itself dates from the century later, and it was erected over the earlier burial ground. The building of this huge oblong size in 78 was the architect of Simeon. He died in 1284 when Pisa suffered a defeat in a naval battle of Melanophthalmions. Closer look at the cemetery itself. The frescoes and things were in there, and you'll see up in the upper right-hand picture the size of the grave sites that were in there, and they have the bodies underneath these stone areas. So they lined them all up and they buried them in that way. Some of the saints' relics, and they really don't have the names of the saints that were there. So it was an interesting thing that they add saints' relics, but they didn't put the names who these saints were or any justification for having them. The Pisa Cathedral is, as any place else in any cathedral in Italy that we've seen, it's not just the artwork. It's not the altar. It's everywhere. The flooring, the ceiling, the walls, even the pillars on the side make this just a requirement that you have to see this. I mean, it's just phenomenal. The size and what it offers in history is just phenomenal. As you see there in 1092, the cathedral was directed as a primatal church. And the primatal church at that time meant that the primate or the archbishop of that area was sort of like the head of all the other archbishops in that region. Now the primate is more of just a title given to people whenever they've either about to retire from the church and things like that. The cathedral was constructed in 1118 by Pope Gelasius II, who belonged to the Catalini family, which was powerful in both Pisa and Rome. The altar of Saint Ranierius, okay, and this is another thing that we saw back in Seville's cathedral, where Ranierius was the son of a prosperous merchant and ship owner of Pisa. His travels took him to the Holy Land, and he decided there to devote himself to God. Matter of fact, his austerity was so excessive, somebody had to tell him to eat once in a while. In 1153, Ranierius returned to Pisa and entered the monastery where he achieved fame and became a preacher, being treated like a saint even during his lifetime. Okay, you see there on the right-hand side where, as we learned in the Seville Cathedral with King Ferdinand, he was laid in what they called incorrupt, which means that he was embalmed, but he was never buried. And you can see him there, the body in the upper vessel behind glass. Okay, so I mean, he was canonized by Pope Alexander III in either 1161 or 1162. Now, we talked about Galileo earlier, and the study of the pendulum, which seems sort of big deal. Who cares? Well, whenever he was only 19-years old, he focused on the attention of the lamp swinging gently above him. Once again, remembering that all the buildings in there leaned or moved or something. So anyhow, this pendulum, this lamp, this oil lamp, which you see on the lower right-hand side, which was the original lamp, was replaced by the electric lamp that you see on the left-hand picture. But anyhow, he started to measure the time by using his own pulse to see how fast or how slow that lamp swayed. There turned out to be several practical applications. A doctor friend created and I'm having a hard time, pulsillogum, which measured the pulse of a patient using a pendulum with a short length of string. When Galileo was 77 and totally blind, he thought about whether the pendulum could be attached to a mechanical clock to regulate it and ensure more accurate measurements of time. In 1657, Christian Huygens from the Netherlands applied this principle to a pendulum to create just such a clock, and many of us have those clocks in our homes today with pendulums swinging from them. We move from Pisa, not a long distance, into the Milan area. Okay, the Milan area is, most people know Milan for different things, mostly fashion, stores, things like this. I mean, it's a beautiful area, it really is, and we'll see some of it. The Celtics, the inhabitants of the region of northern Italy, appeared to have founded Milan around 600 BC. According to the legend reported by Livy in writings between 27 and 9 BC, the Gaulish king sent his nephew into northern Italy at the head of a party drawn from various Gaulish troops. The Romans, led by Consul Scipio Calvus, fought the Insubres and captured the city in 222 BC. The chief of the Insubres submitted, giving the Romans control of the area. Okay, and in 2086, the Roman Emperor these Roman names kill me, moved the capital of the Western Roman Empire from Rome to this area. Shopping in Milan. Season after season, eyes look towards Milan for the next emerging trend. The Milanese luxury comes in all forms, from home decor to showcases, flagship stores, the exclusive brands like Prada, Armani, and nothing Milan doesn't touch to beauty. Victoria Emmanuel II shopping mall finds chic styles and design districts, leathers, bargains, markets, and antiques stalls along the canal. Milan effortlessly eludes styles in every turn. One of the main things in Milan we have to look at is the Milan Cathedral. Okay, and the cathedral is one of the most beautiful and largest Gothic complexes in all of Italy. It took about 500 years to build, and the outside has thousands of finely carved statues, about 2,300 of them exactly, depicting both religious figures and stories from the Bible, including the crucifixion, and the interior figures are even more intricate. Inside, you'll find thousands more statues, high marble columns, and impressive works. The interesting thing is you'll see there by the small picture in the upper right is the golden Madonna that was on the highest spire of the cathedral itself, and that's behind the entrance of the building, which you can't see from this view. During World War II, to distract the bombers, the church had the golden statue covered so it wouldn't be easily spotted by air and couldn't be selected as a site to be bombed. This year, Andrea Bocelli, in fact, did a beautiful rendition from the entrance of the Milan Cathedral. And if you want to see that, you can get onto YouTube. It was absolutely perfect. And we sometimes, when we're sitting here in our small little community, wonder if the world is being affected the way we are, staying in our homes, staying away from our friends and things. If you look at this, you will see that while he's singing this song, The Music for Hope, he is in fact showing pictures of all over the world of cities that are vacant. No movement on Easter Sunday, which in every other year would have been packed. From Mexico City to China to Italy to the United States. I mean, looking at that makes you really understand that we were not by ourselves here. Inside the Cathedral of Milan, okay, once again, the magnificence of these cathedrals can't be understated or overstated. You'll see by the picture of the right, the walls, the pillars, even the floors, everything is absolutely a work of art. These people took hundreds of years and thousands and thousands of hours of intricate work to make these pictures and these designs to, in fact, please God and the people that were, in fact, coming to pray. The left-hand side you'll see is the main altar. That, in fact, well, behind the main altar, the intricate statues and things that you see, plus the beautiful stained windows. It just can't be, like I said, overstated. This is one of these things. The Church of St. Mary of the Graces in Milan. Whenever I was stationed there for a short time, I had the opportunity to walk by this building, thinking nothing of it. It just looked like a church. I was 19 at the time, and I didn't think anything of it. Didn't look into its history. Didn't look into what it offered. Okay, but the Duke of Milan ordered the construction of this convent and church on the site of the prior chapel dedicated to the devotion of St. Mary of the Graces. The main architect, Soleri, which we've heard his name before, designed the convent, which was completed by 1479. The Duke then decided to have the church serve as his family burial site and rebuilt the cloister and apse, both completed in 1490. Okay, now, the thing there, once again, you walk by the building, it's rather plain, outside, at least the front of it. You walk inside, and once again, it's devastatingly beautiful. The gold inlaid and that and the lighting just makes this facility looks like something you've never seen before. But that is not its main claim to fame. The picture of the Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci is here. All right, it is actually in the monastery itself. It is probably one of the most famous works in the world, and one of the most famous, of course, by Leonardo himself. It depicts a dramatic scene described in several closely connected moments of the Gospel, including Matthew 26, 21, 28, in which Jesus declares that one of his apostles will betray him. According to Leonardo's belief that posture, gesture, and expression should manifest the notions of the mind, each one of the 12 disciples react in a manner that Leonardo considers fit for that man's personality. We move from Milan up to Stresa and Lake Maggiore. Stresa first appears on historical documents just before the end of the first millennium when it was a small fishing community. During the Middle Ages, the town was the fiefdom of the lords of Castiglio and Visconti, but it was Bill Merrell who subsequently ruled the region and added the magnificent buildings which we are about to see. He obtained part of the territory in 1653. The entire district was reunited under their rule. They commissioned palaces to be built on the isles of Bella and Madre. Stresa passed into the Austrian hands in 1719 before coming under the rule of the House of Savoy, which is a name that Milan shoppers know very well. In 1748, the town began to achieve its renown as a tourist destination at the beginning of the 19th century, when glamorous villas were built. In 1906, the opening of the Simplon Tunnel heralded the start of worldwide international travel. Trains on the London-Paris-Milan line began to call at the Stresa station, and travelers and writers from all over Europe came to sing the praises of Stresa and Lake Maggiore, spreading their fame to a larger group of people. Once again, when I was stationed here, the government, into their own little world, sent me and had me staying at this hotel. The Grand Hotel, which in fact, at 19 years old, I was too stupid to understand the importance of what this hotel did. As we see that Ernest Hemingway set this hotel as the foundation of his famous work, Farewell to Arms. Stresa was one of those places that, in fact, it's so beautiful, and you see it in the movies today, and I'll point them out to you. Excuse me. In 2002, Stresa hosted the 10th International Hemingway Conference. Stresa has played host to a number of political conferences in the 20th century. In 1935, the UK, Italy, and France reaffirmed the Treaty of Locarno and agreed to form the Stresa Front to combat and contain Nazi Germany. In 1958, the foundations of what would become Europe's common agricultural policy were formulated here in Stresa. And I have to point this out because I thought it was really interesting. The Italian Nova Plano, the plane is just, as I put there, just plain ugly. There's just no way around it. The Italian plane maker built this thing in the 1920s, and it was designed to carry 100 passengers across the Atlantic coast to the United States. The plane only flew twice, and it never flew out of the country. On its second flight, it took off from Lake Maggiore in Italy and made only about 60 feet in the air before it came crashing into the water. The plane had 3 sets of wings, 9 in total, and 8 engines. It had a terrible body design, and the plane was doomed to fail. Adding injury to insult, the wreckage was damaged by fire as it was towed back to shore. One of the villas that you see there, I'm holding the little ticket to get into it, was built in 1855, and the park became as a humble home who fell in love with the area of Lake Maggiore and its stunning surroundings. It was bought by a marquis in 1862. The park began to acquire extensions, statues, and many other embellishments which characterizes it today. Like the churches you see, the walls and the ceilings and everything else in that center picture excuse me, demonstrate that this is not just a humble home. This is a piece of art from beginning to end. It's possible now to visit the villa's 16-hectare park as the lands are open to the public. The estate also served as a museum for Giuseppe Verdi. Verdi produced many successful operas, including La Traviata, Falstaff, and Aida. Isola Bella, which is in the middle of Lake Maggiore, is one of those things that this individual just decided to build out there and made it into a castle. As you see there, it's called the Palace of Delights. It took 4 centuries to complete. It includes scenic gardens, the throne and queen's room, Napoleon's room. The island achieved its highest level of social success during the period of Bergamo in 1751 to 1837, which guests include Edward Gibbon, who you may not remember, but you remember probably his book, The History and Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, Napoleon and his wife Josephine, and Caroline of Brunswick, who was the Princess of Wales at the time. Some of the movies that you will see in the area of Lake Como and Lake Maggiore include some of the recent James Bond movies, and they are Casino Royale. You'll see at the end of the movie where he is recuperating, and that happens to be happening in Lake Como. In the Quantum of Solace, the movie starts out literally in Siena, and you'll see the horse races of the communities. The horse races happens twice a year, and all the 16 or 17 communities put a horse into this race. People, the riders are brought in from all over Europe to ride, representing their area, and they in fact ride twice around, and the winner claims the fame, and they win a trophy, and they win a big religious icon from the church for winning this. It's fascinating to see in real life, but if you watch the movie, you can see it and in fact see what it does. We're going to be talking about as I try to do most of the time, talking about trips for the travelers. Okay, if you're going to go to Italy, there's a couple things you should know so you don't embarrass yourself or embarrass the people around you. The cover fee for services, if you go to dinner or something, okay, you don't have to spend 20% or 25% on a tip for the waiter, okay? More often you'll see a Coperto charge on your bill when you dine out. Coperto is the fee or charge that you'll see at most Italian restaurants. Basically, this is covering the cost of basically rental of the plates and the spoons and the forks and everything that you're having your dinner on. So whenever you see that, you'll see that it's okay. Whenever you unlike us who try to give a tip of 15 to 20% maybe, the charges there are more reasonable if you in fact are paying €1.50 to €4 per person at your table as a tip to the waiter. This is a payment for his service, coming back, bringing bread or oils or things like that back to your table. You don't need to tip on top of the service or on top of that, but as important in Italy, especially if you're trying to eat on the budget. Okay, this is especially important. The early bird gets the worm. In Italy, most things start around, they start around 8, but people don't get up and do anything until around 10. So if you can get to a touristy place earlier, then you can beat some of the crowds. As we've talked in Rome, these places that have large crowds, you don't want to stand in line, so they usually have beat the line tickets that you can buy. They're an additional charge, but you can get them and then circumvent the crowds waiting. And some of these lines, as we saw getting into the Vatican and things, can in fact be very long and very time consuming, 4 to 6 hours waiting in line. One of my top Italian travel tips is to wake up early and get to the door before everyone else. Before 10 o'clock is the best time to get there. And if you're going to do that, before that, go and see what the local life is. Eat at the local dinery. Their croissants are phenomenal. I mean, believe me, nothing that you've ever tasted around here. It's a golden hour of photography as the sun rises, and an evening as the sun sets, and the streets aren't packed with locals or tourists. Enjoy the wine. In Italy, good wines can be had at a great price. Drinking wine is always a way of life there, and it goes with almost every meal. The 3 to 5 lira bottle of wine in the supermarket aren't the bottom. They're not the dregs of wine. They're very good wines. It just happens to be that that's the cost in that area. It's not expensive to have a dinner with good wines. So just enjoy, especially if you're in the Tuscany region, enjoy the wines that they have available to you. Okay? Don't eat near touristy places, okay? Because they are, in fact, set up to, in fact, move people out as fast as possible. Get away from the crowds. Go into the secondary streets and things and find the places that, in fact, are off the beaten path. You'll, one, enjoy the food. Two, you won't have the crowds around. And three, the people who run these, the families that have run these for hundreds of years in some cases, in fact, do a wonderful job. I would recommend walking a few streets away from the main attraction to find more affordable and more authentic foods. We also love to do a little bit of research before you go and find the places that in fact are available. Riposo, like siesta in Spain, Italians like to take a break in the middle of the day. That's Italy's midday siesta from 1 to 4. You can expect to find many shops and restaurants closed during this period of time. Italians like to take time in the afternoon to go home, have lunch, and relax with the family before they head back to work. Bring good shoes. Okay, I think I mentioned whenever I was looking at the Colosseum and everything in Rome, by noon, my pedometer already had almost 18,000 steps. So you really need good shoes. Most of these cities are 100% walking. So prepare to stay off, just to work off that pasta. Stay away from the heels, as many Italian towns have cobblestone streets, and you really don't want to break an ankle, even though if you go to the hospitals, they're really not going to charge you anything because they have socialized medicine. It doesn't mean that they're going to set it perfectly, but that being said, an Italian woman, watch what they wear. They, in fact, are not only used to this, but they, in fact, their shoes are phenomenal. A good pair of comfortable boots or shoes, a nice pair of leather boots or shoes for men that fit great will, in fact, make sure they're polished in good condition. You don't want to look like a slob walking around Italy because of the fact that these folks take their effort and time to, in fact, make themselves look good. If you're walking around, you won't see a lot of excessively torn jeans. You won't see a lot. You'll see fashionably clothes that, in fact, once again, especially in this area, their fashion are first rate. They're not 10-year ago fashion, or you're not going to see people in 1950 attire. You're going to see people that are wearing fashionable clothes, and they do this because, one, they take a lot of pride in themselves and their region. Women seem to have a better idea on what shoes to wear than men do. Men wear boots, and it's very hot there. So it's, like I said, get a pair of comfortable slip-ons that are broken in, and you'll be much better off. Well, folks, this is the end of this tour. I hope you've learned something about these regions of Italy. This is the fourth in the series of Traveling with Bill. We are then moving on to other areas of France and Spain, including Barcelona and Cadiz. After that, we'll be moving on to Portugal and the Azores, and then we'll be looking at the Caribbean, different aspects of it, the Eastern, the Western, the Southern, the Northern Caribbean. So I hope you join us at that time. But if once again, if there's any special things you like, please let us know, and we'll bringing it up. We have programs that will be coming that will talk about Vegas and California and Florida and Williamsburg and things like that. We have many programs planned, about 24. So if, in fact, you like to travel, but you can't because of these uncertain times, we'll be looking forward to having you join us to get a feel of what it's like in other places. So thank you very much for joining us today, and we'll look forward to seeing you in the future.